Last week we focused on Jesus' interaction with the rich young man who was unable to even think about getting rid of all his material things and giving the money to the poor. The man was unable to even think about the sacrifices that it can take to follow Jesus. He wanted to follow Jesus, but he wanted a caravan of his stuff to travel behind him. After that interaction, we're told in the Gospel of Mark that Jesus and the disciples are on the road making their way to Jerusalem. And Jesus stops all of a sudden. He takes the 12 aside from the crowd, and he tells them what will happen to him. In verses 33 and 34 of Mark chapter 10, he says, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death. Then they will hand him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him and spit upon him and flog him and kill him. And after 3 days he will rise again." Jesus says, "I will be mocked. I will be tortured. I will be killed. And then after 3 days of being in the tomb, I will rise again." That's some heavy stuff. It's a lot to take in. What if your friend told you that? What if Jesus said that to your face? What would your response be? Hopefully it's not like the response of James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Keep in mind that James and John, according to the Gospel of Mark, are the third and fourth disciples to be called. And when they're called, they're in the boat with their father and they're mending their nets. And when Jesus calls them, they don't ask any questions. They get up and they follow him and literally leave their father in the boats. The response of James and John to Jesus' proclamation that he'll be tortured, killed, and resurrected, it's bold. They come forward to him and they say, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." Jesus doesn't scold them. He doesn't reprimand them. And he doesn't ask, "Did you not just hear what I said?" Instead, Jesus asks, "What is it you want me to do for you?" Their boldness grows. James and John say, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory." Now, they've heard Jesus talk about vanity, ambition, and power. Yet in response to what Jesus has told them and has shown them, their only focus seems to be on power and position today. As if to say, oh, well, if he isn't going to be here anymore, later on we know where we want to be. We're not told Jesus gets angry, but he has every right to be. This is one of those instances where I wish Jesus would have thrown something, would have yelled. But not Jesus in this moment. He says, "You don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" And they reply, "We are able." We can see them shaking their heads. And Jesus says to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized." And that makes sense to us as we look back on it now. These are his disciples, so it makes sense that his disciples would be able to drink from the cup of the covenant and take the bread of life. And it makes sense that they'd be able to be baptized with the baptism that Jesus has, even if they don't understand all of that fully in the moment. But we know that we are baptized into Christ's death so that we might rise again to newness of life. And so we're united with him in a death like his, but we're also united with him in a resurrection like his as well. And so it makes sense looking back. We can see Jesus thinking this and saying, "Yeah, okay, the cup and the baptism, yeah, sure, you can do that. You don't get it now, but you will. And people who come after you will get it. So I'll say, yeah, sure. But then he says, but to sit at my right hand or at my left hand is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared. The brothers in their boldness proclaim that they want to be in a position of power with Jesus. They want to be at his right hand and to be at his left hand. Not sure why they think they deserve it, but it doesn't mean they don't want it. Jesus says, no, this is not for you. And we have to jump to Mark 15, 21 through 27 to understand why. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it, and they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on his right and one on his left. They crucified 2 rebels with him, one on his right and one on his left. And guess who those rebels were? I'll give you a hint. It wasn't James and John. They are nowhere on the scene. None of the male disciples are actually on the scene when Jesus is crucified. So they definitely don't have in mind what it actually means to be at the right and left hands of Jesus. They don't know what they're asking. We jump back to today's scripture. We're told that the other 10 disciples hear all of this and they become angry with James and John. And Jesus obviously settles the situation down enough because we're not told there's any sort of fight or anyone walks off. We just get Jesus talking. Jesus says to them in Mark 10, 42 through 45, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." Even though we're told the 10 disciples are angry with the other 2, we're not told the source of the anger, which I think is interesting. Are they angry because James and John are seeking power and position? Are they angry because they're like, "Oh my gosh, you guys, have you not been listening the whole time?" Or are they angry because James and John are so bold that they want a place, a position, and they think they deserve it over the other 10? And so are the other 10 angry because maybe they want the places of position? We're not told. It could be all of them. By the way Jesus responds, it could be all of the above. Jesus tells the disciples what life is like in the Roman Empire. Even though they live in the empire, he wants to make it blatantly clear what life is like. Those people who are rulers take advantage of people. They take your money. They take your crops. You don't own anything. They abuse their power. There is corruption. There are tyrants. These rulers aren't just rulers. They're cruel because they can be. Show me a Caesar who's been known for his niceness. These tyrant rulers enjoy their power. They enjoy the oppressive system that they put into place. They enjoy their power. They are tyrants. A word of caution to James and John and the rest of the disciples, and for anyone seeking position, power, and glory above all. A word of caution about pinning hopes on human beings and not God. He goes on to tell them that leadership looks different in their situation in this Jesus movement. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave to all. Servant leadership is a model of living out in the Jesus way. We see Jesus live it over and over and over again. Who doesn't live out the model of servant leadership? Caesar. Leaders in the Roman Empire. What Jesus is telling the disciples in that time, and even in our time now, is countercultural. If you want to be a leader, if you want to be great, you have to serve others. You have to examine your motives. You need to take time to reflect on what you do and what people require of you. Being a leader in the way means that you don't expect of others what you won't do yourself. In fact, it means that you're either the first person to work on something, the first person to help someone, or you're at least right there beside people helping out. It's the kind of servant leadership that we find in a story about George Washington, though no one really knows if it's true or not. One of those folklore American things. But the story has been passed down from the American Revolution. A man dressed in civilian clothing rode past a group of exhausted soldiers repairing a defensive barrier. Their leader was shouting instructions but making no attempt to help them. The writer asked the leader why he didn't help, and the leader responded, "Sir, I'm a corporal." The stranger apologized, got off his horse, and helped the exhausted soldiers. When the job was done, the stranger turned to the corporal and said, "Sir, next time you have a job like this and you don't have enough men to help, go to your commander-in-chief and I will come again and I will help you." And off rode General George Washington. An example of servant leadership. Before Jesus stops talking in this morning's text, he tells the disciples, "For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, to give his life a ransom for many." You ever just thought about how easy it could have been to be Jesus? We talk about this in Sunday school sometimes with the youth. Jesus could have sat back, done nothing, ordered other people around. He could have gone and picked out the same 12 disciples, but he could have just commanded them and said, "Go do this." With the amount of God-given power that Jesus possesses, how easy it would have been to do nothing but just order people around. Yet here he is, walking over all the Holy Land as we know it, teaching and healing. Not yelling. And even though the disciples don't fully understand, he reminds them that he came to serve people and to give his life for humanity. He's literally walking the journey to his own death in this part of Mark's gospel. We know it's coming soon. No earthly ruler in the Roman Empire would do that. To be able to serve the way Jesus does and to give up his life takes an amount of selflessness that earthly rulers do not possess, even if we say we do. Self-sacrifice that Roman rulers cannot possess, because that type of servanthood, that type of leading people and taking care of people doesn't make the empire richer. It doesn't make it bigger. In fact, it doesn't make Caesar look more powerful. It actually makes him look weaker. Yet it makes Jesus look way more powerful. Jesus still calls us to a life of servanthood, still cautions us about the abuse of power, still cautions us when we seek ambition and position, self-promotion over helping others. Still lets us know that earthly leaders will let us down. He doesn't say if they let us down. He says they will let you down, because you shouldn't put all of your vested interest into mere human beings. God, though, God will never let us down. Whatever it is we think we're seeking from earthly rulers and leaders, God has us covered with what we need. God has life-sustaining gifts and power. When we only want to be leaders and give orders, do we listen to the call of servanthood? Jesus says we can't ever be leaders. He just lets us know that if we're going to be leaders, we have to be willing to get our hands dirty with the work. And this is why church ministry is a shared relationship. A shared responsibility of mission and work. As a congregation, a pastor and a congregation, everyone together. This is why the disciples say we have a priesthood of all believers, because we're all responsible for carrying out the ministry of God and helping our neighbors. Is it more important for us to try to be on the left or the right hand of Jesus? Or is it more important for us to follow Jesus and to take care of God's children? This ends this morning's word. Thanks be to God.